WNBA star Brittney Griner and Cherelle Griner are calling it quits. 7 years after the couple tied the knot and 2 years after they welcomed son Bash Raymond Griner, Brittney filed for divorce in Georgia's Fulton County Superior Court.
At 35 years old, Brittney Griner just filed for divorce from Cherelle Griner, the wife who once fought a Russian court, a foreign government, and public opinion itself just to bring her home. 8 years of marriage, 1 2-year-old son, and a documentary that showed the whole world how deeply they loved each other. All of it now sitting inside a Fulton County courthouse file. So what actually happened between the two of them? Stick around, because by the end of this video, you will understand where the real story actually stands right now. The divorce filing that shook the WNBA world. Nobody saw this coming, not the fans, not the sports media, and certainly not the millions of people who had just spent the previous month watching Brittney and Cherelle Griner sit side by side on a podcast talking about IVF injections and embryo transfers like the closest couple in professional sports. Then, on July 30th, everything changed. Brittney Griner filed a complaint for divorce in the Superior Court of Fulton County, Georgia. And within hours, the filing was in the hands of reporters across the country. The petition states that the couple married on June 18, 2018, and had been separated since July 24th, just 6 days before the paperwork was submitted. According to the language inside that filing, Griner describes the marriage as irretrievably broken, with no hope of reconciliation, and is asking the court to grant the divorce outright. She is seeking joint legal and physical custody of the couple's 2-year-old son, Bash, along with child support, and what the documents describe as an equitable division of marital assets and debts. The filing also notes that Griner wants to retain certain property she considers separate, including anything acquired before the marriage, or received through inheritance or an individual gift. An attorney representing Brittney Griner offered a short, careful statement once the news broke, saying only that this is a matter the parties hope to resolve privately, with no further comment at this time. Representatives for Cherelle Griner did not immediately respond to media requests, and as of now, neither side has released a joint statement or addressed the filing directly in their own words. The timing stung for a very specific reason. Just weeks earlier, Brittney and Cherelle had appeared together on the And Mom podcast, hosted by WNBA guard Skylar Diggins and broadcaster Cassidy Hubbarth, where they reflected warmly on their journey to parenthood through IVF. And only days before that, the couple had publicly celebrated their son Bash turning 2, with both women posting tender birthday tributes on social media that gave absolutely no hint of what was coming just weeks later. There is also a detail buried in the paperwork that caught the attention of longtime followers of the couple. Several outlets had reported for years that Brittney and Cherelle married in 2019, a date repeated across countless celebrity biography pages and fan sites. The actual court filing lists June 18, 2018, as the marriage date instead, with previous reports having stated they married in 2019. A small but telling reminder of just how much of what circulates about this couple online has never actually been checked against a legal document before being repeated as fact. At the center of all this sits a 35-year-old Olympic gold medalist who has spent more than a decade rewriting what people thought was possible for a woman her size on a basketball court. Griner is a 10-time WNBA All-Star who spent 11 seasons with the Phoenix Mercury before a 1-year stint with the Atlanta Dream in 2025 and a fresh 1-year deal worth roughly $1.19 million with the Connecticut Sun heading into the 2026 season. She led Baylor University to an undefeated 40-0 season during her junior year, still the only perfect season in the program's history, and she holds the WNBA record for career dunks by a wide margin over any other player. None of that professional success made the headlines this time. This time, it was her marriage. The financial contrast in Brittney Griner's career is remarkable. Despite spending roughly 11 WNBA seasons as one of the league's biggest stars, her total league salary over that entire span barely exceeded $1 million, highlighting the long-standing pay gap between women's and men's professional basketball. Only recently has the WNBA's new collective bargaining agreement begun addressing those disparities with higher salaries and improved benefits. Fortunately, Griner's income extended well beyond her WNBA paycheck. Like many elite players, she earned significantly more through lucrative overseas contracts during the off-season, where salaries often far surpass those available in the United States. She also supplemented her earnings with endorsement deals, book royalties, and investments in real estate. As of the past year, her estimated net worth stands at around $5 million. That figure is expected to continue rising as she earns her Connecticut Sun salary and benefits from future increases tied to the league's growing media rights deals and commercial success. Before we get into who Cherelle Griner actually is, you need to understand just how far she went to bring her wife home from a Russian penal colony, because that story is exactly why so many fans are struggling to believe this marriage has already reached its end. Cherelle Griner, the attorney who fought to bring her wife home. Long before any divorce filing existed, Cherelle Griner was known for one thing above everything else: refusing to give up on her wife when the entire situation looked hopeless. Cherelle and Brittney met years earlier as students at Baylor University, where Brittney was already building a legendary college basketball career, and Cherelle was studying political science and government, later adding a minor in family and child studies. They reconnected years afterward, well after Brittney's earlier marriage had ended, and their relationship grew quietly compared to the public spectacle that would eventually follow. Cherelle went on to study law at North Carolina Central University School of Law, graduating in May 2022, and her identity as a working attorney would end up mattering more than almost anyone could have predicted just months later. The two got engaged in 2018 after Brittney's earlier marriage had ended, and their relationship was built largely away from cameras in its early years, a contrast to how public their lives would eventually become once Brittney's Russian detention turned them into a story followed by millions of strangers. In February 2022, Brittney Griner was detained at a Moscow airport after authorities said they found vape cartridges containing hashish oil in her luggage, an offense that carries serious criminal weight under Russian law. What followed was nearly 10 months of imprisonment, a Russian court proceeding, and a 9-year sentence that shocked people who had followed Griner's career for years. Cherelle became the public face of the fight to bring her home, speaking with reporters, appearing at press conferences, and refusing to let her wife's story fade from the news cycle, even while the war in Ukraine was dominating global headlines at the exact same time. Cherelle has since spoken about the emotional weight of that period in painfully honest terms. She has described the pair intentionally planning which parts of their long-delayed in vitro fertilization process they wanted to experience together, a conversation that took on new urgency once it became clear Brittney's freedom was anything but guaranteed. Griner herself later admitted to People magazine that during her detention, she wondered whether the family they had planned together would ever actually happen, saying she kept thinking about how she could possibly ask Cherelle to keep waiting through a 9-year sentence neither of them had chosen. Griner was ultimately released in December 2022 as part of a prisoner exchange between the United States and Russia. a deal that remains one of the more debated diplomatic moments of that era, partly because of who else remained behind in Russian custody. Marine veteran Paul Whelan, who had been detained in Russia far longer than Griner, was not included in that particular swap, and the decision to prioritize Griner's release drew public criticism at the time, criticism that Cherelle and Brittney have both acknowledged directly rather than avoided in later interviews. Cherelle's advocacy did not stop once her wife came home. She continued speaking publicly about wrongful detentions and eventually became an executive producer on the Brittney Griner story, the ESPN documentary that premiered at the 2026 Sundance Film Festival and gave audiences an unusually intimate look at both women navigating that ordeal together as a couple. That documentary is worth pausing on for a moment because it complicates the timeline in a way that makes the current divorce filing land even harder for fans to process. Reviewers who watched the film in Park City described it as being just as much a portrait of Brittney and Cherelle's marriage as it was a recounting of the Russian detention itself, built around home footage, quiet domestic moments, and years of what looked like genuine partnership. Watching that footage now, only months after its premiere, and against the backdrop of a fresh divorce filing, creates exactly the kind of contrast that has fans across social media struggling to reconcile the two versions of this story. Now that you understand just how much history sits underneath this marriage, it is time to look at what the last 8 years actually looked like behind the scenes, and how quickly life moved from a wedding day to a courthouse filing. Inside 8 years of marriage, IVF, and parenthood. Strip away the headlines from the past 2 weeks, and what remains is a genuinely detailed public record of a marriage that, for most of its existence, looked stable, loving, and remarkably open with fans. Brittney and Cherelle's relationship began after Brittney's short first marriage to fellow basketball player Glory Johnson ended. That earlier marriage lasted barely a year, and Griner filed for an annulment on grounds of duress and fraud before the divorce was finalized in 2016. Griner and Johnson share twin daughters, Soleil Diem and Ava Simone, born in October 2015, though a court later ruled that Griner has no biological tie to the girls, since Johnson had conceived using her own egg and a donor's sperm during a period when the two athletes were already separating. By contrast, Brittney's relationship with Cherelle unfolded on a much steadier timeline. The two built a life together long before Bash arrived, and according to the marriage date listed in the divorce filing, they had already been legally married for 6 years by the time they announced they were expecting their first child in April 2024. Bash was born that July, just before Brittney traveled to France to compete for the United States at the Paris Olympics, adding a third Olympic gold medal to a summer that already included the biggest personal milestone of her life. The path to Bash was not simple or quick. Cherelle has explained that the couple intentionally timed their IVF process around Brittney's WNBA off-season and her own law school graduation, treating the entire experience as something they were determined to go through together rather than delegate to anyone else. Cherelle has recalled the emotional toll of the hormone injections and the physical strain the process placed on her body, and Brittney has admitted it was genuinely difficult watching her wife go through that discomfort. Their plans were interrupted entirely by the Russian detention in February 2022, then picked back up once Brittney came home, culminating in what Cherelle has described as 3 viable embryos, one of which eventually became their son. Public affection between the two women was a near constant throughout their marriage. Brittney regularly posted tributes to Cherelle around anniversaries, birthdays, and Mother's Day, often crediting her wife's strength for holding the family together during the hardest stretch of Brittney's career. Cherelle, in turn, built her own public identity around motherhood and advocacy, appearing at award shows, film premieres, and public events at her wife's side while continuing to practice law in her own right. The couple also made frequent public appearances together outside of basketball entirely. They attended the Costume Institute benefit in 2023. While Cherelle was pregnant, walked red carpets together during awards season, and sat for the joint premiere of the Brittney Griner story in January 2026, an event where Brittney was photographed standing and visibly emotional as the audience rose to applaud. None of that history has been undone by the divorce filing, and nothing in the court documents suggests any of it was ever untrue. What the filing actually confirms is a specific, narrow set of facts: a marriage date, a separation date, and a request for custody and an equitable division of property. Everything else, the emotional context behind why two people who built that much of a life together decided to end it, remains entirely outside the public record and, at least for now, entirely private. So, if the paperwork does not explain why Brittney Griner actually decided to end her marriage to Cherelle, what does? That is the part everyone searching this topic actually wants answered, and it deserves an honest answer rather than a guess dressed up as certainty. So what really broke the Griners apart? Here is the part where a lot of entertainment coverage tends to invent certainty that simply does not exist. And it is worth being direct about that instead of pretending otherwise. As of the filing date, neither Brittney Griner nor Cherelle Griner has publicly explained what led to their separation. The divorce complaint itself uses standard Georgia legal language describing the marriage as irretrievably broken with no hope of reconciliation, phrasing that appears in the overwhelming majority of no-fault divorce filings and is not, by itself, a window into the actual cause of a breakup. Brittney's attorney's statement asking for privacy while the matter is resolved remains the closest thing to an official comment either side has offered, and it deliberately says nothing at all about motive. That silence has not stopped speculation from filling the gap. Some commentary has pointed to the sheer physical distance the marriage endured over the years, Brittney's overseas basketball obligations earlier in her career, back-to-back Olympic commitments in Tokyo and Paris, a new stint playing in the unrivaled 3-on-3 league, and now a franchise change to the Connecticut Sun for the 2026 season, all of which meant long stretches apart, even during the best years of the marriage. Others have pointed to the lingering psychological weight of the Russian detention itself, an experience that historians and reporters covering the couple have documented as reshaping how both women approached stress, parenthood, and their own relationship long after Brittney's release. None of that speculation has been confirmed by either party, and treating it as the definitive answer would be exactly the kind of unverified leap this particular story does not need. What can be said with confidence is this: Brittney Griner filed for divorce in Fulton County, Georgia, on July 30th, citing a separation date of July 24th. She is seeking joint custody of their son, child support, and an equitable division of property, while asking to keep certain separate assets acquired before the marriage. Cherelle Griner has not filed a public response, and no interview, statement, or social media post from either woman has addressed the actual reason behind the split. Anything beyond that right now is speculation dressed up as insight, exactly the kind of thing this couple's own story, one built on years of transparency about an incredibly difficult decade, deserves better than. Fans searching for a single dramatic explanation, an affair, a betrayal, a scandal of some kind, will not find one anywhere in the public record, and inventing one to satisfy a headline would do a disservice to two people who have already lived through more genuine hardship than most public figures ever face. It also helps to sit with just how quickly public perception can flip once a single legal filing enters the picture. 2 months ago, Brittney and Cherelle Griner were being celebrated across sports and entertainment media as one of the more openly loving couples in professional athletics. A pair who had survived an international incident together and were still willing to talk publicly about something as private as fertility treatment. Now, the same couple is the subject of divorce coverage built almost entirely around a 4-page legal filing and a handful of old interviews with very little actual new information to work from. That gap between what fans think they know and what has actually been confirmed is exactly where speculation tends to move fastest, and exactly where it deserves the most scrutiny before being repeated as settled fact. It is a pattern that shows up again and again whenever a private relationship becomes public property. The actual paperwork stays narrow and dry, while the commentary around it grows louder, more confident, and increasingly detached from anything either party has actually said. Whatever comes next, whether that is a quiet, private settlement or a more public chapter somewhere down the road, the facts that do exist paint a picture of 2 women who spent 8 years building something real, weathered a crisis most couples never have to imagine surviving, and are now navigating an ending that neither has chosen to explain to the public just yet. Their son Bash remains at the center of both of their filings and both of their public lives, and how his parents choose to co-parent him going forward may end up telling us more about this story than any court document ever will. With this, we have come to the end of this video. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, do well to like, comment, and subscribe for more content. To enjoy more thrilling stories, click now on the following video that pops up on your screen.